We recently completed a series on the full story of Fallout New Vegas. We sided with every faction, explored every dialogue tree. Now that we know the whole story, it's time to choose a side. So far, I've published a video on why each faction is bad for the Mojave, and I still believe that's true. Each faction has its pros and cons. There is no perfect faction, and I believe that was intentional. Obsidian didn't want us to have an easy choice, the perfect gleaming faction sitting right before us, the obvious choice that everyone would pick. No, they wanted it to be a little bit more complex. They gave every faction some nuance, some light and dark sides. So every faction has its pros and cons, and yet we still have to pick one. The rest of this video draws conclusions based on what we've discovered during my series on the full story of Fallout New Vegas, and builds upon many of the arguments I've made in my previous videos about why each faction is flawed. You may wish to watch those before ending with this one. I believe that the Legion is the easiest to disqualify. My video on why they are bad for the Mojave was over 40 minutes. I tore them to shreds. But in short, the Legion is doomed to fail. There is only so much land they can conquer before they meet the sea. Then all they can do is turn around and consume themselves. And they're making the same mistakes that they accused the NCR of making. They're stretching themselves far too thin. The courier was right when he confronted, like Atlanteus at the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, that the Legion can take the dam, but they can't hold the Mojave and the East. They have the resources to hold one or the other. They can't hold both. Now, my instinct is to side for an independent New Vegas. I don't like the NCR's imperialism. I believe people should be free to rule themselves, but the independent ending we get in the game is not really an independent ending. It's the House ending, with a robot and the courier in place of Robert House. Yes Man and the courier decide themselves what's best for New Vegas. This isn't an independent New Vegas. We're swapping one autocrat for another. Here's what a real independent New Vegas would look like. The people of New Vegas, including the casinos, but also including the residents who live there, gather together to form a variety of councils. These councils make decisions for the betterment of New Vegas, and everyone who has a stake in New Vegas has a vote in the council. That is an independent New Vegas, but that's not what we get with an independent ending. In my video on why the independent ending for New Vegas is bad for the Mojave, I also expressed concerns about putting a robot in charge of a huge Securitron army, a robot that has already shown signs of self-determination, including the desire to upgrade his personality to make himself more assertive. That's disturbing, it's scary, and so I don't really think the Yes Man ending is best for the Mojave. And so we're left with House and the NCR. And this was a really difficult decision. I have a lot of problems with House, as I expressed in my video on House, but looking back on that video, I think I was too hard on Robert House. I don't think he's a bad man. I do think he wants to do good. I think he's more interested in his own success, in his own well-being, but it just so happens that his well-being and Vegas's well-being are one and the same. For all intents and purposes, House, while alive, is Vegas. There are also many reasons why I think House deserves to have Vegas. For one, he's already proven that he's willing to put everything on the line to defend it. Before the war, he's responsible for shooting down many of the nuclear missiles that would have devastated New Vegas. New Vegas exists as it is today, in no small part thanks to Mr. House. He's the one who built the Securitron army that even at this moment is the sole reason there is peace in the streets of New Vegas. Well, peace relative to peace in the wasteland, that is. And he's the only one to have demonstrated a plan for the future of New Vegas. Every other faction is so obsessed with the looming Second Battle of Hoover Dam that I haven't seen any evidence of their thoughts for after the battle. What happens if they actually win? House has those plans, but the NCR? I haven't seen any plans from the NCR. But House's vision doesn't hold a future where Vegas is independent, and he's not shy to admit that. He is no fan of democracy. Sure, he admits that his plan is to become an autocrat of New Vegas, but he believes that's the best solution. After all, we've already lived through democracies. And he's right. Autocrats can make decisions much more swiftly than democracies. With democracies come bureaucracies, and with bureaucracies comes lack of progress. Everything gets bogged down in paperwork. No one is held accountable. Everyone points fingers at everyone else. Progress is sluggish in democracies. There's no question about it. With an autocracy, House can do what he wants because there's no board of directors that he has to answer to. There's no one standing behind him, pulling his puppet strings, or giving him the finances he needs to achieve something. There is only himself. And so when he moves quickly. That is the beauty of House's plan. That said, the problem with House's plan is with it comes a single point of failure. House. House is not a god. House is not immortal. Up until now, he might as well have been immortal. After all, he is over 200 years old, and he has the machinery in place to keep him alive. But much of that time was spent in hibernation, I guess. He's been asleep for a very long time. He woke up only recently. His machinery put him into a deep coma once before. Who's to say it couldn't do it again? Who's to say it couldn't fail completely and kill him? For over 200 years, House has been hibernating within the bowels of the Lucky 38. But even without the courier's intervention, Benny was working on a way to burrow into the Lucky 38. We find tunnels underground that he had begun to dig to reach the Lucky 38. Now, he had been digging in the wrong direction, which is why we find his tunnels connected to Vault 21. But I'm just saying, the courier is not absolutely necessary to kill House. House is mortal with or without the courier. It's possible for someone else in the future, like Benny or like Yes Man, to find a way to kill House. And if House dies, everything collapses. With House's autocratic plan, there is a single point of failure. And so we're left with the NCR. The NCR with all of its problems. The NCR, as imperialist as it is. And that is the thing I dislike most about siding with the NCR. I don't like annexation. I don't like the idea that the NCR thinks it can move into the Mojave and just annex this and annex that. There are people living there even outside of Vegas that have their own property, their own farms that they have built. And then suddenly the NCR swoops in and starts demanding taxes? Doesn't sound right to me. As I said earlier, if there was an independent Vegas to side with, I would choose them. But the independent Vegas we get is not it. If there was a Mojave provisional government, much like the Commonwealth provisional government, I would choose them. A government that looks out for the Mojave's needs, not just Vegas's needs. And that's another problem with siding with Yes Man. The only people who benefit from an independent New Vegas is New Vegas. But there's more to the Mojave than New Vegas. There's Freeside, Westside, all of the small towns in and around the outskirts of Vegas. We're trying to make a decision for all of the Mojave, not just for New Vegas. If there was a Mojave provisional government, I would side with them. They would make the best choices for the Mojave as a whole. But there isn't. The best we have is the NCR. As we learned from Fallout 2, their democracy is incredibly important to them. When you become a citizen, yes, you have to pay taxes, but with that citizenship, you gain the rights of a citizen. You can vote. You cannot vote under Robert House. You cannot vote under Caesar. You can't even vote under the Courier and Yes Man. You can only vote under the NCR. You want to know who the biggest critic of the NCR is? It's not Caesar. It's not the Courier. It's not even House. It's the soldiers of the NCR. Time and time again, we go from town to town, meeting with soldiers, meeting with caravanners, meeting with other citizens of the NCR who have nothing but complaints about the way their government works.
If the Republic's sinkhole progress doesn't kill us, greed will.
Including Cass, a charming character who can become our companion. And even though she says that NCR is her people, she's still had plenty of complaints.
If NCR took the same stand and committed patrols to the roads, then I'd think that'd solve a lot of their problems right there. So NCR tries to hold on to everything. They can't, because it's too big for them to get their arms around. They can't guard the roads. They can't put a line of troops around the Mojave. It's just greed that makes the heads back west even try. Aside from the people in the towns, it's the soldiers that suffer for it most. Ever seen NCR troops asked to go after gangs at 3-to-1 odds? That bear flag doesn't make them bulletproof. And when those gangs were caused by NCR in the first place, like the powder gangers, Caesar on a crutch. Don't get me started there.
The reason the NCR is as flawed as it is because it is comprised of people who have freedom. And people are flawed. An autocracy will pretend that their rule of government is flawless, but an autocrat is just as flawed as any other human being. The difference is that an autocrat has complete control, including control over speech, and so they can paint a picture that everything is fine and dandy. But a democracy, in theory, doesn't have control over the speech of their citizenry, and therefore the flaws of that democracy become even more apparent. Despite recognizing the NCR's flaws, NCR citizens still would rather work with the NCR than the Legion. The NCR is giving many of them jobs, giving them reasons to come out to the Mojave to begin with. The NCR is investing in the infrastructure of nation building, something none of the other factions are able to do, with the exception of House, but again, remember, he's only focused on Vegas. Despite how slimy General Oliver is, I think he makes a great point when confronting the courier if you choose to side with Yes Man.
Do you know what you're doing? Making a nation like you think you're doing ain't like chowing down on a pile of fancy lad snack cakes. Think you got the guts to carve out a frontier? Build towns, protect the roads, run supplies, train troops?
And he's right, we really don't have any experience with nation building. Many people in the comments were saying that, didn't Ulysses tell us that the courier built a nation during the divide? But no, the point of that conversation was that Ulysses was demonstrating that it was the courier and his job that built the divide. It was the courier as a package delivery person who provided a lifeline of supplies to the divide that built that nation. And so in Ulysses' logic, he saw the courier as a nation builder. And that doesn't mean that the courier has any nation-building experience beyond delivering packages. The only one of the four factions that has any experience building a society besides the NCR is the Legion, but of course the society that they're trying to build is very different from that of the NCR. It's cannibalistic and it's doomed to fail. Everything the NCR is trying to do is great. The problem is that they're stretched too thin.
NCR tries. It's just that trying doesn't mean a whole lot when you're paying your respects to the dead. NCR's my country, and I support it. Anyone who says otherwise, I'll feed them my knee. I know which side of the firing line I'm on in the Mojave, just so you know. I'm not some blind, flag-saluting, do-as-they-will NCR lover. They're family. But let me tell you what family means. You ever had a brother? Some dumbass younger brother, say, who knocked up the pastor's daughter, can't hold a job, and is home away as a jail cell? That's NCR. Their compass is spinning all the time. Look, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't want the Brotherhood, or the Followers, or the Vegas families running the Mojave. All of them are a different kind of fuck-up. NCR just has some shaping up to do. Maybe Caesar kicking them in the nuts is a nice wake-up call, is all I'm saying.
If they had the manpower to patrol the roads, they would. And yet, despite that, their presence in the Mojave is affecting every other faction. Their presence and their presence alone is keeping the Brotherhood of Steel from putting checkpoints on the roads and confiscating technology. Their presence and their presence alone is keeping the Legion from razing every town and enslaving all of the women. And the only reason the Khans aren't also raiding settlements of the Mojave is because the NCR had beat them down. You remove the NCR from the Mojave, it becomes a completely different place. Suddenly, the Brotherhood, the Khans, the Fiends, the Jackals, and many of the other factions no longer have someone keeping them in check. They will own the roads, forcing the Legion to take on much of the burden they hadn't had to up until that point, forcing the Legion to take some of the heavy losses that only the NCR had been taking up until that point. Yes, the NCR is stretched too thin, but that's only because they're the only faction that has demonstrated a capacity and a desire to even police the roads, to get rid of raider gangs that are preying upon their citizens, to push back technology cults that wage war for insane reasons. Now, of course, the wild card in this conversation is the courier. The courier is the deciding factor. The courier can decide who will take the Mojave as their prize. But the courier is mortal, the courier will die, and at some point, whatever power the courier puts in place will have to carry on without the courier. I think the NCR is the faction best able to do so, because their faction is a nation of laws, a nation of free people free people who vote. And NCR voting does work. Presidents have been deposed in the past during elections. I don't think it's a perfect democracy. I don't think it's a perfect representative democracy. But everyday people do have some modicum of power. And the NCR is the only faction that provides that. And when making this decision, we can't look for perfection. Perfection is a wonderful idea, but it doesn't exist. Certainly not amongst the choices we have been given in this game, and definitely not in the real world either. We can't wait for the perfect faction to walk by, a faction that ticks every checkbox on our list. That faction will never appear. Instead of burying them all like Ulysses wants to do and starting fresh under the false presumption that whatever arises from the ashes will be perfect, it won't. I think it's much better to deal with the imperfect governments that are here, to work with the people of those governments towards perfection, knowing we'll never achieve it, but in so doing finding a little bit of justice for everyday people now and again.
I'll do what I can, and those folks that got killed need to be answered for.
I think the NCR back west, when riled, is going to be the worst enemy the Van Graffs and the Crimson Caravan ever had. They're all so mired in procedure and paper out there. The kind of evidence we gave is going to be worse than shooting them.
I do think it's possible that with the Legion gone, and the Fiends gone, and the Khans gone, and the Brotherhood gone, and House no longer being an issue, that the NCR would be able to finally take control of the Mojave. Citizens from the West would no longer think that they're sending their sons and daughters to die in Nevada for no reason. The NCR would finally be able to establish law and order in Nevada, and more people would have a greater quality of life. During our gameplay, we meet some not-so-good people working for the NCR, like Colonel Moore, who only looks for results, and General Oliver, who's really in it for his own ego. But we also find plenty of really good people working for the NCR, like Ambassador Crocker, who's really trying to make a positive change on the Strip. Like Lieutenant Hayes, who wants to protect the town of Primm, he's just hamstrung by lack of resources. Like James Shue, Ranger Ghost, Ranger Jackson, and the countless other NCR soldiers who work hard, treat people fairly, and who really believe in what they're doing there at the Mojave, who really believe they're there to help people. The problem, as Cass said, is with NCR leadership. And thankfully, because it's a republic, that leadership can and will change. It's the only faction whose leadership can change by the will of the people, who are affected by the decisions that leadership makes. As long as there are good people in the NCR, on the ground in the Mojave and in California, then there's hope that the NCR will one day get better leadership and make better decisions that affect so many people. In short, I ultimately chose to side with the NCR because it is the faction that gets closest to achieving the things that I think are most important for a nation to achieve. The greatest amount of freedom for the most number of people, a desire to defend and means by which to defend that freedom from individuals and factions that wish to rob people of that freedom, and an established history that gives me faith that they'll be around for a long time to come. But those are just my thoughts. I'd love to know what you have to think. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I publish many Fallout videos each and every week here on my channel, so if you don't want to miss my next episode, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. If you already have and you still find that you're not getting my notifications, consider following me on Twitter. I manually update Twitter with every new piece of content that I publish. I have a shirt shop with completely unique designs that you can't get anywhere else. My designs come in a variety of men's, women's, and children's sizes, and in a wide array of colors. They come on other products as well, like smartphone cases, stickers, posters, mugs, prints, etc. So if interested, you can find a link to my shop in the description below, or you can click here. If you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming a patron on Patreon or a member here on YouTube. But more than anything, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with more brand new videos.